So thank you very much indeed for the time and generosity. I'm pleased to meet you, to talk to you, and I have a brief introductory note, very brief introductory note about you, and then we start with the questions. Hans-Georg Moeller is a professor of philosophy at the Department of Philosophy and Religious Studies at the University of Macau in Macau, China.
Right.
He has written prolifically on Taoism and philosophy. Amongst your books are, I've listed like 4 of them: Taoism Explained, From the Dream of the Butterfly to the Fishnet Allegory, I think 2004. The Philosophy of Tao Te Ching, 2006. The Moral Fool, a case for Immorality, 2009. And the book that is going to be the focus of our talk today is Genuine Pretending, on the philosophy of Zhuangzi, with Paul D'Ambrosio, I think.
Correct.
Right, which was out in 2017. That was a very nice read, and I really enjoyed. And so my first question is, who is a genuine pretender? Very, very general question.
Well, first of all, we're all genuine pretenders all the time. So the term is actually Paul D'Ambrosio, the co-author of the book. He coined that term, and he basically explained to me what it means. And we had long discussions about it, and specifically about this point that everyone is a genuine pretender all the time. That is what we understand as kind of the general existential condition of being human, at least in, our contemporary social context, going back probably several thousands of years.
Right.
And simply put, this means that we adopt a certain personality. More specifically, we adopt an identity. And this identity is somehow pretended. And we use the term pretending also very much as it is used, for instance, in American English with regard to child play. Right? When children play, they take on specific identities, and then they kind of pretend to have that identity, to be that identity, and then they kind of develop a kind of a genuine identification with this identity. So the idea is that pretending in this non-negative way is the condition for becoming genuine. So it's not an obstacle to becoming genuine.
Right.
It's not the opposite of genuineness. To the contrary, it is the condition that you can identify with something.
Right.
So you have to pretend an identity, again, like for instance, in the sense of child play. And so we pretend and we learn. We can call it, like with other language, we are socialized. We are socializing ourselves. We adopt a social persona, and we learn to, and we then, identify with this persona existentially. That means psychologically, socially, biologically, and so forth. So that is the existential condition, that everyone is all the time genuinely pretending. But people then think they forget about the pretending element. They tend to forget about it. And that's the problem, that they then think they're simply genuine. And that means then they pretend to be genuine. So while, as a matter of fact, as an existential condition, everyone is a genuine pretender, many people actually pretend that they are genuine and not pretending.
Right. The second question is that already in the introduction to the book, you make it clear that a genuine pretender is not an altogether new idea. But by making reference to Brooke Zipporin's article, Zhuangzi as Philosopher, you claim that what distinguishes your approach from his approach is, I'm quoting you, perhaps best summarized by saying that rather than as a wild card in the general sense, we see the genuine pretender more specifically as a joke card.
Right.
End of quote. Could you please elaborate on that point?
Well, Brooks Zipporin is a great scholar. I appreciate him very much, also personally. And he wrote a lot about Taoism. So I learned a lot about Taoism from him, and same is the case for Paul. And he wrote this very nice piece about Taoism, which is very close to our understanding of Taoism and the genuine pretender. And he uses this metaphor of the wild card, which is from playing cards, right? That a wild card is a card that can basically take on various functions that you want it to take on, right? Whatever, you have like a set of cards and you have queens and kings, and the queen can only be a queen and the king can only be a king, but the wild card can be anything. And again, that is genuine. It's an image metaphor for genuine pretending, right? The card then pretends to be a king, but it genuinely functions as a king in the game, right? And so this notion of this metaphor of the wild card regarding kind of a Taoist perspective on what identity is basically the same idea as genuine pretending. Now, a wild card, a specific form of wild card is the Joker. I don't know, you're familiar with these card games?
Yeah, sure, yeah.
And so you also, that's a name for a wild card, right? A Joker is a specific wild card. But of course, a Joker also means that's what, you know, someone comes from the word joke, someone who makes jokes, someone who is in a way a comedian or something like this. And so there is also this very important element of this humorous element that is more explicit in the term Joker than in the term wild card.
Right.
So I like the term Joker better than wild card. It's the same idea, but it just adds this humor element.
Yeah, I think you're right that actually they're almost same ideas. The point for me was that actually humor in your understanding plays the role of contingency in his understanding of wild card.
Very good.
Right?
Yes. Yeah.
So humor is equal to contingency in your approach.
Yes, absolutely.
Right.
Exactly.
Okay. So again, one of the distinctions you make use of actually is the one made by Trilling and applied between authenticity of Taoism and sincerity. This is a very interesting and helpful distinction that you make, especially because role-taking towards the middle of the book is being somehow incorporated in the pretender function. Because, could you please also explain these two wings that brings you to genuine pretender? On the one hand, you have authenticity. On the other hand, you have sincerity.
Yeah, we use the term both these terms. You basically take them from Lionel Trilling, who wrote a book in the 1970s. He's a literature scholar.
Yeah.
It had nothing to do with Chinese stuff or Taoism.
Right,
he was writing about Western literature, basically modern Western literature. And the book is called Sincerity and Authenticity. And that's where we take these two notions from. And we use them then in our own way. So sincerity means building your identity through sincere commitment to social roles. And I mean, you told me you come from Iran, from Iranian society, right? And you know, I've lived in China, and these are still societies, I suppose. I'm not very familiar with Iran, but that's my prejudice. That is also very much a sincerity society, where you build a sense of who you are through sincerely committing to certain social roles, for instance, in the family, but they can also be religious roles, they can be roles in the military, they can be roles like nowadays in sport. This is my perhaps personally closest experience of sincerity. because I used to, be in sports teams when I was a teenager, and did competitive sports, soccer or football, and then handball. And when you're like a team in a sports team, you need sincere commitment to the role you have in the team, right? And you build a strong sense of identity through that. That has been sometimes called collectivism, but I don't like the term collectivism for several reasons. We could also talk about that, but that would be a different topic. So that's what sincerity means for us: building a sense of your identity, building a sense of who you are through sincere commitment to roles. And this sincere commitment is psychologically, mentally, existentially, also bodily, like in sports or military, right? Or in the family, right? In sexuality and so forth. You sincerely commit to these roles with all aspects of your humanity, right? And in this way, you build a very encompassing and strong sense of identity. That's sincerity. Now, authenticity basically is a different way of building a sense of selfhood, of identity. That, as Trilling explains, and we follow that broadly, was basically emerged, whatever, especially in European society in, let's say, beginning with the 16th century or something. It's a long period anyway. So, and that means it's a different, like I call it, identity technology. And that this new identity technology regards the commitment to roles as something bad, as mere conformity to social expectations. And so it's a revolt against social conventions and so forth, right? And we see a lot of early modern literature, and there's a rebellion against social expectation regarding to whom you're supposed to marry and stuff like this, right? And other role expectations. And then this building your sense of selfhood through orientation to social roles is replaced by finding your true self and by or developing your true selfhood. And that becomes philosophically also very strong, and we find it in Hegel, and then throughout the 19th century, Stirner and Nietzsche are philosophers of authenticity.
Most romantics are actually interested in that regard.
Exactly, yeah. So that is this kind of new identity technology, authenticity, building a sense of selfhood through, as for me, the formula is pursuit of originality.
All right.
Right? Sincerity is commitment to roles. Authenticity is the pursuit of originality. And the pursuit of, you cannot find originality in the roles because the roles are, by definition, non-original or unoriginal. So that is a completely different identity technology that very much arises in a dialectical Hegelian relation as in opposition, in contradiction to sincerity. And yes, so we use this theoretical framework. And then we say, and from a sinological perspective, from a Chinese studies perspective, from a Chinese philosophy academic discipline perspective, that is actually the main point of our book, that we basically criticize the overwhelming academic reception of Taoism in general and Zhuangzi in particular, basically since the 19th century. So we basically disagree with the widespread understanding of Taoism in general and the Zhuangzi in particular as a philosophy of authenticity. We think that is an anachronistic understanding of Taoism and the Zhuangzi. What these interpretations get right is somehow that Taoism and Zhuangzi is also somehow questioning sincerity and is somehow critical of sincerity, but it's not, doesn't recommend authenticity as the alternative to it. So we think in the age of authenticity, that's a term by the philosopher Charles Taylor, especially like then in the 19th and 20th century, basically most of the interpreters of Taoism, first Western interpreters, and then the overwhelming, or not, but I would say still a majority of Chinese scholars as well, re-import this reading of Taoism from the West and apply it themselves, and basically read Taoism to an extent also as a philosophy of authenticity. So in a way, our book was an attempt to argue against the mainstream interpretation of Taoist philosophy as a philosophy of authenticity. And we're saying, no, it's not a philosophy of authenticity. It's a philosophy that is correct, that is critical of sincerity, but instead of advocating authenticity, it basically is a philosophy that presents genuine pretending.
Right.
Not authenticity.
Right, exactly. Very interesting. Actually, that's why the first questions from my point of view were about this relationship with sincerity. Like sincerity starts from, as you say, sincerity starts from inside towards outside,
right,
from one's true self and its convictions to the public sphere. It's almost always accompanied, interestingly you say, by a reward, the fair repute.
Yeah,
is my question.
Yes.
Is genuine
reputation.
Exactly, reputation. Fair reputation. Is genuine pretender, in your interpretation, in the end, against rewards and against reputation?
Well, not really against it, right? But the point of the genuine pretender is that you develop a relaxed attitude towards your reputation.
All right.
So you don't over-identify with your reputation. Because in sincerity, when you commit sincerely to roles, there is always the danger that you become overly committed to your roles and develop some form of fundamentalist identification with your roles and with your social status, for instance. So if you over-identify with your social, as I said at the beginning, then you pretend that it's genuine. Let's say you have a high social status, right? And then the danger is, and that's really a main theme of the Zhuangzi, of the book Zhuangzi, the pathologies of over-identifying with your social reputation. And that's a big danger, right? That if you have like a high position, you become arrogant, and if you have a low position, you get depressed and frustrated. And these are I think this is kind of an existential analysis of the origin of unease. That's actually, if I may stray, there are many similarities between Taoism and Buddhism, right? And the main Buddhist idea is that we are suffering as humans, and then they look into where does this suffering come from and what can we do against it. And then they, advise all kinds of methods, mental methods, but also others to avoid suffering. Now, Taoism is somewhat similar, the Taoist approach. And again, so the interest is why are people frustrated? Why are they arrogant? Why are they somehow in a state of unease? What prevents them from being at ease? And the idea is it is kind of over-identification with your roles. Right. So the idea again is basically you have to develop basically a mental and I would say existential strategy to, on the one hand, which basically just understand that you're genuine pretending all the time.
Sure. Sure.
Which means you cannot, but in another word, you have to play your roles. But when you play them, and with a strong emphasis on play, then you can maybe achieve a state of ease. And not you, but also the others who you play your roles with.
Right.
And then we're back to the Joker.
Exactly. So before going further to the joke card and the humor part of the book, one of the I mean, it's a comment. There's no question. I would be happy if you just can explain that. Another quality of genuine pretender in the book is his or her facelessness. In your article, it's not in the book actually. In the article, Lizi's retirement, you already used the word facelessness, and at that I'm quoting you. The story about Lizi, I don't know if the pronunciation is correct, the story about Lizi's retirement illustrates how his teacher, Wuzi, remains unharmed by virtue of being faceless, end of quote. Genuine pretender, in that regard, is given a quality that is even protected. I mean, through this facelessness, you even have, you're not only aware of your pretension, but you're also, it's a kind of safety even. That,
right.
You know, it's kind of, I mean, the attempt to be aware of that or avoiding that over-identification is not only helpful, as you say, existentially, but it's also safe. It's true, and it happens through facelessness.
Yes.
So just like about facelessness, what do you think?
Yeah, I fully agree with what you said. This is one of the many this article and the quote you quoted refers to a small story in the Zhuangzi. There are many stories in the Zhuangzi, and most of them are somehow funny and weird and interesting. And this is a kind of complex story where the main protagonist is this guy who has the capacity to basically completely change his outward appearance. And the funny thing is, like, maybe I just tell the story.
Yeah, sure.
So Lizi is also a famous Taoist figure, and the Book of Zhuangzi makes usually fun of a lot of people. It makes fun especially of Confucius and Confucians, but it also makes fun of other Taoists. And Lizi is one of those. And this is a story that makes fun of another Taoist. And so this Taoist, as the story goes, was kind of following this great master, this great guru or whatever, and you know, was admiring this teacher who had this capacity. No, sorry, I got this. He was admiring a master. The master then is tricked by another person, and this other person has this weird capacity to change his outward appearance. So the master was supposed to have this. Lizi's master was supposed to have this capacity to judge people, judge their state of being, judge their state of mind just by looking at them. And this other guy had the capacity to completely change his outward looks, so that this other guy was not basically able to read him, read his face, right? And that kind of he completely failed in his art of reading people. And so this is this face changer. Actually, still today, that is a kind of a Chinese, how to say, magical performance. If you look it up on YouTube or somewhere, it's very interesting. You have this kind of, it's a performance art where people very quickly change masks they wear, like in an instance of a second, and it looks fantastic. And so they are kind of face changers. They change, they do like, and then they have a different mask on. And it's a magic trick, right? And so this is kind of an early Chinese somehow face changer who can just change his outward appearance. And again, this means that I think the story subverts this idea that the outward appearance is something that kind of substantially defines you, right? It subverts this idea of the, let's say, sanctity of the role identification, that it can be arbitrarily changed.
Right.
It shows the arbitrariness and the non-substantiality, which again is then the facelessness, right? There is, which is also very different, that's why the story is a Taoist story, from the authenticity idea. So the Taoist point, different to the authenticity idea, is not, which is like probably the main metaphor for what authenticity is. You have to throw away the masks and see the real self underneath. Yeah. But Taoism and the genuine pretender has the insight that there is no face underneath the mask.
All right, interesting.
That is the whole point. Exactly. And so this figure of the face changer who tricks the seeming false Taoist master is that, that is precisely symbolizing the non-authentic critique of sincerity, right? So the point is not to find the true self beneath the mask, but to understand that beneath the mask, behind the mask, is no face.
Exactly. I see, exactly, that's the point. And I quote you another part of the book, not the article, the book. You say Taoist genuine pretending is not altogether, is not another kind of authenticity.
Right.
It is not about authoring, it's interesting here. It is not about authoring or creating a self of ownness, or transcending social norms. Strong attachment to any type of self is rejected outright in genuine pretending, as is an individual isolated sense of self. Right. The genuine pretender, you add, does not cultivate an identity according to authenticity or individualism, nor according to a socially constructed relational self.
Exactly.
End of quote.
Yes. So that once you understand that you are genuine pretending, like everyone else, you understand that both sincerity and authenticity are forms of genuine pretending, which means, that there is no true self ultimately in authenticity. It's just an identity technology. Just as in sincerity, you understand that, you're playing a role. So it's a way not of, you can still be sincere, and we are sincere, and I am sincere, and you can be authentic, and I am authentic, but at the same time you can understand that authenticity and sincerity are identity technologies under which is not a true self, but the origin of which is genuine pretending. They are a result of genuine pretending.
Exactly, I see the point there.
Yes.
But again, another comment in the book is that, I'm quoting you, free of internalized behavioral commitment, genuine pretenders have no self in the Confucian sense of having cultivated determining impulses for how to act in particular situations or relationships. The actions of genuine pretenders, therefore, never essentially reflect their psychology, never essentially reflect their psychology or who they are, since they have no such essential self.
Right, that's the point.
I think I'm repeating the same point, but it is a very focal point of the book.
Yes.
Because
it's like the no self is very central to Taoism, also very central to Buddhism. And we are basically just interpreting this notion of no self through genuine pretending. Right? Right. The insight into genuine pretending is an insight into the facelessness, or is an insight into the non-existence of an essential self.
Right. And one of the particularities of sincerity, towards the end of the book you show, is the importance of names. So here I have, again from the book, according to the philosophy of genuine pretending found in Zhuangzi, social names may either be accorded with or not, but neither rejecting nor aligning oneself with names has any priority, and neither one is constitutive for building identity. A gender pretender may have a good name or a bad one, but in either case, the name goes only so far and merely remains a guest that is not interesting, that is not matched with a sincere commitment in substance and does not infiltrate the non-identity of its bearer.
Yeah, we formulated that very, maybe a little bit too academically, but yeah, that's of course the point. Now, this is the actual language that is, well, it's English words, but the translation of the actual language that is used in the Zhuangzi. So they, in the Zhuangzi, of course, they don't say sincere commitment to roles or you know, pursuit of originality, but in the early Chinese philosophical debates, this, you know, the notion of name was very important. That was like a main theme, a main topic in early Chinese philosophy. And name basically means something like roles, right? Your name, your names are designations that designate roles. That was one major meaning of name. And this was a very, very important topic in early Chinese philosophy, very central. And most philosophical schools thought that social order depended in one way or another on living up to your name, that people would live up to their names, right? And that this was the key to social order, which in turn, again, was like probably the main concern for early Chinese philosophers, like comparable to truth in Western philosophy, order. And again, specifically social order. And again, for a philosophy of social order, which was a central theme, the theme of names was super important.
Right.
So, and that's why the notion of name, or the concept of name, or the word name, also plays an important role in the Zhuangzi. And this is what the book explicitly talks about, names. And again, it basically expresses a philosophy of genuine pretending in terms of this philosophy of living up to your name. And again, the idea is the same, that name is the role. And these are, this is a quote from the Zhuangzi, that the names are just guests, like the mask that the mask changer wears for a while. And just a guest like you stay for a while, and then, right? And and then it's contingent, and some other guest comes, right? And you go somewhere else, and you may be the host of someone else, or you meet tonight you're the guest of someone else, right? And so that's the contingency that constitutes life. And we should also, that's a metaphor again for how we regard the roles. The roles are just kind of also guests that come and stay for a while, and that we then engage within genuinely. But if we have another guest, that's very different. And we can also engage with the other guest. And, you know, that's an art of life, that you're not just, you know, that is very dynamic and contingent.
Right. Again, about like you just mentioned that it's a very basic Chinese idea. This idea of like names in the pre-Taoist even traditions. In Analects, there is a sentence on the importance
Confucius, sayings of Confucius,
Exactly.
as it is sometimes translated.
Yeah.
Yes.
Is a sentence on the importance of the correspondence between names and things in Annex 13.3. What would you do first given political power? Without question, it would be to ensure that names are used properly.
Exactly, yes.
So here, instead of taking roles in Zhuangzi, we have borrowing.
Right.
It's another concept that you use in the book. So instead of being somehow stuck in the names so you have this borrowing,
Right.
constant borrowing.
Yeah, same like a similar metaphor as guess.
Exactly. And you say that in the phrase that is another translation, I think, I'm quoting, dipping into the borrowings and transform, or in borrowing among all different things, which means taking identity temporarily, like me, your guest, which is in contrast to the sincerity discourse. And that is no wonder that the other meanings of jia, I think, or jia, I don't know, is fake, false, or
Jia, yes.
jia, or deceptive.
Exactly,
right?
yes.
So it's interesting. Can you also explain a little, please, about the possibility of, or the probability of actually this deception?
Right. So that's an interesting word which has this double meaning, jia, of borrowing and deceptive, right? And it has both a kind of neutral meaning and then the bad meaning. But yeah, from if you have like an over-identification, overly sincere perspective, then you would regard genuine pretending as somehow deceptive. That you're not really sincerely committed, that you're somehow just, pretending again, and then pretending is bad, right? But for us, like, pretending also has the double meaning. It can be something bad, like, faking, but it also can be understood like in child play in the sense of borrowing. And so also the Zhuangzi uses then this kind of jia, borrowing, in a non-negative sense, just like we use the word pretending in a non-negative sense, right? Because again, if you pretend not to pretend, only then is there real fakeness. Those who pretend to be genuine, these are the real hypocrites. I mean, again, this is an interesting problem. And maybe we talk too abstractly about this. I think we can talk much more specifically about this. The general pathology, the general psychological problem, the stress that that is at the heart of so many kind of social and psychological problems is that you think you must be completely 100% committed to your role, and that you must be your role. That is like a word that the contemporary Confucian thinker Roger Ames, who's also a very excellent scholar and also a very, very nice person. But of course, he's an interpreter of Confucianism, not of Taoism. And he kind of insists that, he calls Confucianism a role ethics. And that's, I think, a perfectly correct categorization of what Confucianism is. As an ethics of sincerity, it is a role ethics. And again, he says, like for Confucians, the idea is not just to play your roles, but to be your roles. That's like Roger Ames' language. And again, I think from the perspective of the Zhuangzi, this kind of demand that you be your roles easily leads to stress. that you whatever, you find you're not a good enough husband, you're not a good enough wife, or you're not a good enough teacher, or you're not a good enough president, and so forth. And it also leads always to the suspicion of hypocrisy. That has been a major problem for the Confucians, right? They believe that people really are their roles. But no one can really be 100% their roles. So there's always the suspicion of hypocrisy. And the Confucians really tried until today with their role ethics to kind of eliminate the hypocrites and just remain with those ones who are really, really sincerely committed. But that's an over-identification, right? So basically, again, Taoism, genuine pretending, says just realize that you're genuine pretending and realize that you're playing your roles and that you cannot but play your roles. And that's not hypocrisy, right? Because you don't pretend to be genuine. And so the hypocrisy problem kind of vanishes if you realize and understand that everyone is just playing their roles. And then again, playing also can result in a form of ease. And again, I think today, in today's context, maybe sports is a good example, right? Okay, if you want to do sports, you need to be sincere. You cannot be a team player if you're not identify in the sincerity mode. But at the same time, this is just a game. And after whatever, if you play soccer, after 90 minutes, it's over. And then you shake hands with your opponents, and then whatever, you drink a beer together and maybe still talk about the game, but you do something else. And, so that is the point of genuine pretending. Like, you understand, most people understand when they are, well, some not, right? Some over-identify and can never get out of this and then treat it as if they were like, they become fanatics. But most people manage to, operate, to basically play their roles in sports as genuine pretenders.
One of the interesting points you just, I make a small digression here.
Yeah.
One of the interesting points in the beginning of our discussion you just sort of emphasized was that you just avoid the term collectivism and individualism probably for your own reasons, but basically you tend to say that societies like Germany, like German society or Western society is more an authenticity society, claims to be. Yet I see here also the traces of sincerity no less. I mean, like a person who tries to be the best possible mother or best possible father or best possible teacher is also here visible. That's why I want your idea. I mean, of course it is less collective. Of course the expectation is that, okay, am I a good sister, a good brother, a good son, a good daughter, of course. But again, you see that people even here hypocritically sort of claim what they are actually not able to fulfill in terms of their sincerity and their roles, in terms of correct citizens, like decent behavior, decent language, correct language is also even more than other societies. I mean, like language at least shows me that here sincerity also plays a big role.
Yes and no. Now things get complicated. So, I mean, as I just said, I gave like an example of my own experience with sincerity in sports. So I'm not saying people are not sincere. And whatever, people I know are also very sincere regarding their family roles in Germany. In my
As an example, I'm not
of course, so I'm agreeing with you. Right. So sincerity isn't dead, and it's still everywhere. But mostly, like in my case, and I would say that's common in Germany now for my generation, it's mixed. We are switch in between sincerity and authenticity. And authenticity is somehow regarded, has primacy over sincerity. And we regard the sincerity somewhat a little bit suspiciously. Now, but, and this is not in the Genuine Pretending book, but in the follow-up book that Paul D'Ambrosio and I wrote, You and Your Profile, our point is that now we have a third identity technology, namely prophilicity. And that people curate profiles and that they build true investment in their profiles. And I think what you are describing here regarding Germans is prophilicity. It's not sincerity. Again, this is not to say that these people are not also sincere in many ways. They are. But, you know, whatever. If you, to give a very simple example, if you continuously post pictures from your family, happy family life on WhatsApp, that's not sincerity, that's prophilicity.
All right, okay. Interesting. I have to read that book and come back to you again. But
this is like so I explained like the sinological purpose of the Genuine Pretending book. That was to argue against the dominant authenticity interpretation of Taoism, right? That was our scholarly main objective. Now our philosophical main objective, which is not the same as the scholarly objective, was basically to do the groundwork for our following book, Prophilicity, on Prophilicity, You and Your Profile, which argues that actually today, as I just said, we have a third identity technology that is dominant specifically in Western countries, and that is neither collectivist nor individualist, and that is profile-oriented. And again, here our main idea is we need a Taoism for today. We need genuine pretending, not under conditions of sincerity, as in the times of the Zhuangzi, when Confucianism was the dominant sincerity culture, and you needed a philosophy of genuine pretending to somehow ease the pressures of the regime of sincerity, right? So now we think you need to understand genuine pretending in order to build resistance and maybe find ease under the pressures of the regime of prophilicity today.
Which is a new technology of self.
Exactly.
Right.
So that was the philosophical purpose of the Genuine Pretending book, was to point out that the insight into genuine pretending and the understanding that everyone is a genuine pretender all the time is, so to speak, the key to build up a form of, let's say, immunity against the pressures of the respective regimes of the identity technologies. Because whatever identity technology you have, they all tend to become fundamentalistic, and they all come with very strict ethical regimes. So in China, and maybe also in Iran, and maybe in 19th century in Germany, you had very strong sincerity pressures that would cause pathologies, and that's also a topic in the book, which would then be reasons for people, for instance, to commit suicide. That's an interesting study. If you look into the reasons why people commit suicide, they kind of reveal the identity technologies that is at work.
All right.
So in Chinese culture, for instance, people commit suicide because they think they lost faith. And they cannot bear to live faceless, not faithless, but facelessness,
right.
And that is for them like an existentially unbearable
scandal.
Right. Yes. And in authenticity, whatever we have, like when authenticity, die Leiden des jungen Werther, the sorrows of the young Werther, right? You commit this kind of suicide as a kind of protest, and basically to prove your authenticity.
Yeah, against meaninglessness of the world.
Yes,
you know,
yes,
like
yes.
nihilism issues. And
Yeah,
so on.
but somehow you prove your originality. It's the ultimate point of
through a
proving.
protest and rebellious act.
Yes.
Right. Interesting for me is that this prolificity, I think that's the name of the third technology of the cell, is very important to expand and explore, because some people might think that genuine pretender is actually that one, because of this constant changing of the face and constant being on the surface. I think that's a very important distinction, and that's why I think that's a great decision to write such a book, because because like a lot of people think that, okay, simply being, as you said, like on internet and posting and every time changing your identity, that only that guarantees that you are a genuine pretender. But no, you can even take it as your new identity.
Right. Let me
sure,
add
also
some wood on the fireplace.
Also check if the camera is warm enough. Because I can. Sure. Wow. Already 52 minutes.
How much?
52 minutes.
Okay.
Yeah, I have a couple of more questions, and then sure.
Yeah, I think that's an important point. I actually thought about this point myself a lot. So that maybe prophilicity makes it easier than sincerity or authenticity to understand and accept genuine pretending, precisely because of the reason that we are so much used to changing our faces on Facebook somehow and different platforms. And then under conditions of prophilicity, it might be easier to recognize and accept genuine pretending as a general existential condition.
No, I think it's very interesting, because it reminded me of an article that I think it was in the late 80s, if I'm not wrong, published it's a very small article by Gilles Deleuze. It's like on societies of control. And there he makes a distinction, of course, having resort to Foucault's books, he makes a distinction between new societies as societies of control. And the difference is that in the disciplined societies, like prior to societies of control, the borders between like the places that you change, you go from a school to military, you go from military to university, they are so clear.
Right.
But in the societies of control, they are so fluid that you never, like the new technology of control, they are so fluid that you go from here to another city, but just through your credit card you can be traced.
Right,
you can be seen, like you're on surface constantly.
Right.
And some people think, perhaps as an illusion, that it's a kind of resistance, but it's not resistance.
No, of course
That's
not.
why
Yes.
it's the third technology very interesting.
Yes.
To tell that no, resistance is not there.
No. That's yes, I fully agree. Yes. So now we're basically, controlled by whatever the structures of the platforms that we build, that we create our profiles on.
Yeah, I mean,
it's
a given.
They control whatever. Facebook controls how you, or Instagram somehow controls.
And
the construction of your
even
profile.
aside from that, this ability that you're able to change constantly your roles is actually the new form of technology.
Right.
So you have to be aware of that new technology in order to resist that, So simply changing roles from teacher to father.
But it's no longer roles. That's the whole point.
Yeah.
Like nowadays, we no longer have roles. Because roles come with fixed expectations, and very importantly, with present peers. Like the roles are enacted in the presence of your role mates rather than your soulmates, right? In the family, but also in sports. Everyone has to be there, basically. But with a profile, first of all, there are often not really any fixed, stable expectations, right? The expectations of being a good husband or a good wife or a good daughter, they were basically the same, and you could read it and learn it and it wouldn't change. But what's a successful profile? That can change any week, right? You say this today and it can be very bad for your profile next week. So it's completely unstable. And importantly, you're addressing people you don't know personally and who are not there. And you do this like whatever, now with a profile on a dating site, right? You go on Tinder, right? You have to develop your profile. And you precisely want to present yourself to people who you don't know. Not to the people you know already. It's very different from the role, right? Because you're not your role mates, right? And you do the same when you do a job application, right? You do the same if you are whatever, an Airbnb host, which is what we write about in the book. You know, you not only want your friends to stay in your Airbnb, you don't just want to have guests. Yes, you're addressing specifically those people who you don't know, and this is that's what makes the profile so different from the roles.
There is another point. Like again, it's not a question. I would be just happy to hear that. What kind of affects are at work in Genuine Pretender? I have a sentence from you, not from you, sorry, from the book. It's a shorter version of Zhuangzi. The quote is, "They were cool like the autumn, warm like the spring. Their joy and their anger intermingled with the four seasons." So it's very interesting and different understanding of affects and emotions. What do you think of that?
Well, I mean, generally Taoism also regards emotions as the cause of potential pathologies. So if you're over emotional, it causes suffering, it causes, and so, but if you have no emotions, that's also very bad. So again, you have to have your emotions in order to be human, but at the same time, you shouldn't be overwhelmed you have to avoid being overwhelmed by your emotions, which again, and that's very important, again, it's all about ease. So it's about, you know, which sounds very contradictory, but you have to be able to suffer with ease or to be joyful with ease and so forth. And we didn't talk about humor yet, because that's like really central, and it brings us back to the beginning of the conversation.
You can start now. I mean, the relation of humor to emotions.
Yeah, that's very important, right? Because, you know, if you look at, for instance, Freud's theory of humor, well, there are two theories of humor. The reigning theory of humor is about incongruity, that you realize the incongruity of something, and that it can be related to basically the relief theory, which goes back to Freud, of humor, that humor brings relief. And by realizing an incongruity, for instance, the incongruity between your role and yourself, between your original true self and yourself, between your profile and yourself, and you can kind of, through humor, feel a relief about not having to have this congruity. You experience the incongruity, you laugh about yourself, right? This kind of, that is... And you can do so, and that brings this relaxation, this relief, and that is the main point of, you know, that brings a state of ease when we laugh. When, I mean, the Kant's definition of laughter, like eine gespannte Erwartung löst sich auf ins Nichts, and it's like basically it didn't mean it in this way, but tension is released into nothing. And in a literal sense, that's exactly what humor is, the tension that is produced through, for instance, having to sincerely commit to your roles, or the tension to pursue your originality, or the tension to be truly invested in your profile, is a very strong tension. And then you experience this relief by understanding the incongruity there and by accepting and affirming this incongruity. And this is what that's the basic function of humor. So the genuine pretender is basically a joker, because he or she succeeds, at least momentarily, in, you know, understanding, realizing this incongruity, and then somehow in a having this laughter. The Buddha has this laughter too, Nietzsche has this laughter too, which is basically this insight into incongruity again, that then brings about this kind of ease. That's my kind of
exactly. But to confirm that, and even to provide more food for thought from the book, from the Zhuangzi, from the book, I have a quotation which is actually from the Brooke Zippori's introduction to the book. It's interesting, and I would be happy to develop that. It goes like this: that funny philosophers have always been hard to come by.
Right.
Profound comedians, perhaps even more so. To enter into this work attributed to Zhuangzi is to find oneself roused and enraptured, not only by its beauty, that's the point for me, not only by its beauty, but by its intellectual and spiritual depth, but also by its provocative humor.
Exactly.
And its sonorous beauty. But what is even more precious and unusual here is that these three-headed torques seem to erupt in this work all at once. So spiritual, beauty, and humorous.
Right.
It's perhaps Zhuangzi's humor that is beautiful, his beauty that is profound, his profundity that is comical.
Right, exactly.
This work defies the dreary but prevalent notion that the serious is the important, that the playful is the inconsequential, and above all, we are under some obligation to draw conclusions about ourselves and our world and then stick to them.
Right, exactly.
It's beautiful.
Very nicely put. And I think the funny philosophers are hard to come by. On the one hand, that is definitely correct. But then I think a problem, like in the history of the Zhuangzi, is then that the humor gets lost, that people don't understand the humor. And they only understand the serious aspect, if you want, or the metaphysical, you know, then they come up with like as if this was like a very serious metaphysics, which I think it isn't in Taoism. The humor is that which gets most easily lost, in not just in translation, but already in the transition itself. So I think there might have, like, whatever, you read nowadays interpreters of Nietzsche, and already, like, most of the humor in Nietzsche seems to have been forgotten. Exactly. And you have analytic philosophers who study Nietzsche. They have no clue whatsoever about the humors, which is central to so many passages by Nietzsche. And I think with respect to the Zhuangzi, it's even more drastic. So the humor is like in that which gets most easily lost in transcultural transmission. And it's not easy, like whatever, like I remember like when I started studying Chinese many decades ago, I had this book, like 500 something like this Chinese jokes. I couldn't understand a single one of them. I mean, I translated them with my bad Chinese. That wasn't the point. The point was that I didn't understand what's funny, right? That because the cultural difference and the context, and I couldn't. None of these jokes was funny to me. And somehow I think like that also happened to the Zhuangzi, right? That the people were reading the Zhuangzi, and of course another reason because humor is scandalous, humor is provocative, as in that quote, and then people rather give it a sanitized reading, and you sanitize it by a moralized reading, reading by basically taking out the humor. And that's kind of sterilizing it, right? And so I think the Zhuangzi has been sanitized and sterilized, and that has happened, I guess, to many philosophers. I mentioned Nietzsche as another example. And you probably, and that's my question to you. So how about Sufism? Has something similar happened maybe there?
Actually,
too?
I was about to react that the same problem emerges there, that the people try to make coherence at the cost of humor. I mean, humor is usually the price you pay for coherence.
Right.
And of course, it's very useful and functional when you want to like frame a metaphysic out of such a thing like sophistic texts, you know. And like Rumi is one example, you know, one of the Persian poets.
The most famous. Perhaps.
The most famous, perhaps, yeah. And it is a fascinating poet. I mean, like every time I read, there is something new that I learn. But at the same time, you see that, I mean, this person uses such bad language sometimes. And you're just shocked. How can he be? I mean, he's so blasphemous and he's so dirty, the language, that he can't be that coherent. I mean, he's actually everything except coherence.
Right.
And people make a very easy, coherent philosophy and get rid of the humor, get rid of the blasphemy, get rid of anything else, any mask, and make him a very authentic figure of like depth and profundity.
Right, exactly.
You know? The same happens there, and it's a pity, not only in Rumi, in other. Even there is a figure. I mean, I wrote recently, actually last year, an article published in one book. One of the figures that comes in another Persian poet, namely Hafiz, is Rend, and Rend is very much similar to genuine pretender. Rend is a person that constantly changes role, and his or her ultimate aim is to resist hypocrisy in the society.
Right.
And hypocrisy, as you mentioned rightly, emerges easily in a sincere-oriented society, which of course was part of that society, and that's the actual society. So there are very similarities in that regard. Yet there is one point that I think is also worth talking about, is that in some part of the book you tend to compare somehow, or even assimilate sometimes the figure of genuine pretender in Zhuangzi with a trickster. I think that is for me a little it's for me interesting and curious at the same time to know your argument, because for me trickster in the hermetic sense of the word is a person that is constantly on surface and takes it or accepts it as a role. I don't know what your idea is, but at least the Hermes, the trickster figure that I have in mind, which a lot of 20th century philosophers in France and in the West actually worked on, is more like the third technology for me. I don't know what you think. Yeah,
I see. Yes, yeah. Yes.
But I would be happy to see if it is how to say it. It's like a.
I see your point.
Yeah.
And yeah, you can definitely read the trickster in that way. Yeah, I agree. But for us, the trickster again was that referred to this story that we discussed earlier, the face changer. And the face changer is in that story, the face changer is a trickster in that sense that he doesn't allow others to pin him down to one role. Right? The face changer makes it impossible for this other guy to read his face. And so the trickster is a person, how we understood it, who is capable of somehow evading or subverting the role expectations that others have on you. They get frustrated by not being able to identify you by your role.
I think I understand totally the point there, but I think that you might agree with me that even if the trickster takes his constant facelessness as a role, that would be again defining itself or himself
Sure,
as a,
absolutely.
as a role.
Yes,
I have to always evade.
I agree with you. I mean, that brings us back to prophylicity, right?
Exactly. I think
right?
that it's
and so maybe
thing.
Nowadays we're all kind of tricksters, and then we are prophilic tricksters.
I think we are in the age of actually
exactly. That's what I think too.
Yeah.
Yes.
Another small thing that I wanted to discuss here was that. It is my observation, can be absolutely wrong, but I like that the whole acceptance of incongruity theory of humor, sort of, I mean, it's interesting for me that not all humor is actually necessarily, I agree with you, perhaps 80% of humor can be analyzed in terms of incongruity theory, but not all forms of humor are necessarily based on incongruity. An example is from an author. He's a friend of mine, and we talked actually. Stephen Gimble, the American writer, he has written a lot about humor and humor theory. One example is affiliative humor, like between friends. It could be a joke. It can rely on shared experiences and the things that like actual cultural commonalities or references, like a light-hearted mentioning of something, we have similar problem, and you mention something that is actually not incongruous, quite the opposite. It is something similar that we both know, but it brings us laughter. So I think that like the general understanding of humor rightly is based on incongruity theory. But in a lot of cases, when I read koans, or when I read like Zen pieces, or when I read like haikus even if there is some humor, that humor is not necessarily incongruity humor. That's a kind of congruity and familiarity humor that is based on sort of, correct my generalized idea, is based on harmony. So my point is that in that regard, like the humor in a lot of Asian, it can be even in Sufism, Buddhism, or in Taoism, is actually many times, even more than the Western understanding or the dichotomy of tragedy, comedy, is mostly based on congruity and familiarity. Because the more familiarity and simplicity you have, your humor requires less incongruity. I don't know if my point is really...
I think I know what you mean. I would just put it maybe slightly differently, but I fully agree, I think, if I interpret you correctly, that there is another aspect that is very important to humor, and that cannot be fully explained just with incongruity, and that has to do with harmony and with a social situation where, again, I fully agree with you, humor has this function to increase harmony, breaking the ice, whatever, or making, again, everyone at ease. So humor is something social, is something between friends, is to establish an harmonious atmosphere, vibes, right? Good vibes. And that's again because it releases tension. And again, that's different from incongruity. Or it signals being at ease with one another, what you call familiarity, right? It's a joint experience. Why do you tell jokes? You don't tell jokes to yourself. Actually, there's a joke about people telling jokes to yourself because it's absurd, incongruous. But anyways, why do you tell jokes if you're good at telling jokes? Otherwise, it doesn't work. But if someone is really good at telling jokes, and then that produces harmony. So that produces familiarity, or what you call like inside jokes that only work between people who already have built. You know what an inside joke is like? That only the people.
Just like in a community, they understand and love.
Yes, yeah. Or maybe just a couple, right? Couples have lots of inside jokes that only the couple understands, and that ties them together and confirms their bond. and confirms and has the function to produce a moment of ease. So yeah, I completely agree with that aspect of humor, and that cannot be fully explained with just on the basis of incongruity.
Yeah, perhaps the word that I used was not really the best possible word, like the harmony word. But I sometimes
like harmony. I like that word.
Yeah. I mean, but sometimes I think that reading Khan or reading something from Zen Buddhism or from Taoism, like be it Tao Te Ching, be it Zhuangzi, I think there is sometimes something that makes humor possible, and it is not necessarily incongruity or incongruous state of the word, but sometimes it is, I don't know how do you pronounce it in Chinese, wu wei.
Yeah, it's correct.
I think it is the wu wei that results in humor, that you, in relation to something very simple, you might even laugh. Something that is not incongruous. It is simple, exactly, but through the source of this wu wei, you might even laugh. You might even not laugh, you enjoy humor.
Yes.
There, and change your identity or don't take yourself seriously.
Yes. Yeah, I agree. I mean, again, like it's this... I can't say like the release of tension that then results in nothingness, right? And this wu wei, this kind of nothingness, this experience of nothingness, is somehow a release of tension.
Exactly.
And therefore, it's that's what you have in Zen Buddhism.
Exactly. I have 2 questions left, or one even.
I mean, release of tension is really a thing in Buddhism, I think, also. It's something that connects Buddhism and Taoism. Right? This, I mean, what is enlightenment? One way of defining this kind of sudden enlightenment in Zen Buddhism is the sudden release of all tension that you have.
Exactly.
Right? Because we always have, and the tension is the cause of stress, it's the cause of unease. The tension can be between people, and there's always whatever. We just met today, right? There is still a kind of a tension between us, naturally. And when we have like a joke or something, then this bonding, then it releases this tension in nothingness. It's not that the tension is replaced by something, it's just that you feel that, I agree with you. And I think that's specifically kind of that the Zen Buddhist koans, that they are very much also about, that they are kind of cases, that's what they call cases basically, of releasing tension.
And bring it to nothingness that you mentioned, even in Kant, perhaps I have like two questions left. One main point that I wanted to discuss today was the interesting point that you also mentioned in the book there, that is also from chapter 4 of Zhuangzi. First, I read that part from the book, and then like my point, it's not even a question, it's like co-thinking. The book says something very interesting, that everyone knows how usefulness is, but no one seems to know how useful uselessness is. I find it brilliant, and especially in relation to that tree, to that old tree, that I would be absolutely thankful if you can explain this story and the importance of uselessness, and also the relation of that to the genuine pretender figure. Because I think in our age of victimhood, it is exactly the alternative to being victim. Like you try, instead of being victim, to celebrate your uselessness sometimes. And I think that is a very brilliant attitude that you also sort of...
Say that again about the victim.
I mean, like what I found interesting in that exploration of genuine pretender is that we are overwhelmed by the discourse of one of the writers calls it tournament of victimhood.
Sure,
You know, like
yes.
everybody is trying to be competing, like
Of
I am
course.
more victim or
Of
you're
course,
more
of
victim
course, yeah.
in all sorts of identity politics.
Of
and
course,
so on
of
and
course,
so
of
forth.
course, yeah.
One of the interesting things that I found that you can get, and I can take as a lesson from Zhuangzi or all these Taoist or even Buddhist mentality, is that, dude, instead of celebrating your victimhood, you can celebrate your uselessness.
Right.
You know, because
Right.
it is even more precious and it even gives you
Yeah.
more usefulness.
Yes,
You know?
yes.
So
Yeah,
what
that's
do
a
you
very
think of
good
it?
point. That's a very good point. I mean, the uselessness, like these stories that you mentioned, whatever, the tree who is completely useless because this is so gnarled or whatever the English word is, and that you can't be used for anything. So no one cuts it down, right? Or whatever, the person who is like a complete cripple and cannot be drafted into the army or something like this. And so that uselessness has a very strong immunization. Again, it's an immunization that basically you cannot be used by others for these social purposes. And that's very, it's a, right? And that's, in this way you can avoid fulfilling the social expectations and avoid being a victim of the regime of sincerity, being suffering from the regime of sincerity. And I agree with you. I think actually victims today very much make themselves, or if you profile yourself as a victim, you make yourself useful for a certain discourse, which is a very powerful discourse. So you put yourself into the service, you make yourself usable for a specific current dominating almost religious narrative that you fit yourself into, civil religious narrative. And so I very much sympathize with what you said. I mean, the point to maintain your sanity is to avoid making yourself available, making yourself used for these dominating narratives and these dominating, religious or civil religious or ideological frameworks. And you maintain immunity by making yourself useless for this kind of discourse. And I think that's a fantastic idea.
I mean, like last point, I will be silent and shut up and you can complete the discussion, is that, like, what I like is that it's also in association and in accordance to the question of health.
Exactly, that is a key question.
The relation, genuine pretender is not only a person that linguistically tries to play with language and make joke. He or she is also able to run a healthy life.
That's the main point of Taoism. I agree very much with what this one sinologist, he's not even a sinologist, I think, Norman Girardot, he wrote a sinological book about Taoism. And he said, at heart, the Taoist tradition is medicinal. It's about medicine. And that's also what I think that he's completely right. And most of practical Taoism, Taoist religion, is about health very much in a physical sense. And they do all these practices in order to have a long life and live as long as possible and basically maintain vitality at the utmost. And the Zhuangzi is about sanity, about mental health, remaining sane in an insane society, and that has all these stress factors and regimes and moral regimes and ideological and religious and pressures all the time. And to maintain sanity, that is the core. That's what Taoism is about. It's about maintaining sanity. It's medicinal. And again, humor that's why we need humor, because humor is the best medicine. And that's exactly at the center of it. That's why I call it's therapeutic rather than normative. It's not a moralistic or a metaphysical approach. It's a therapeutic form of philosophy, like Buddhism. That's again like the core. Buddhism is, as I said earlier, right? It's the core idea is how can we avoid suffering. That's a therapeutic idea, and Taoism shares this therapeutic approach to philosophy, as probably many early Greek philosophies did.
And even Stoicism, you know, like,
Yes, of course, Stoicism. Taoism is also a form of Stoicism.
Yeah.
It's Stoicism is a form of Taoism.
yeah,
whatever
well,
you
especially in relation to
How about
emotions,
how about these traditions you work with? Do you also have this therapeutic element there, like in the early Muslim traditions or something like
yeah,
this?
I think I fully agree with you. Of course, there is also oscillation between this Confucian and you know, like non-Confucian in all sorts of, you know, like through Sharia, the question of Sharia, you have more norm, you have more, you know, roles defined for you to do that, you know, as I don't know, based on your gender, based on your age, based on your role, of course. But what happens is that Sufism, like that, comes from East Iran, that I'm pretty sure that is influenced from India and China,
Right.
Inspired, definitely, is sort of rebelling against these norms and produces some kind of liberty in the sense of inner liberty, in the sense of no, I should not necessarily define myself through those roles. What is interesting for me, and it was also you also talked about already, was that, and is that this figure that I talked about, Rend, and similar to Genuine Pretender, actually that was what drew my attention to your book, and I found your book fascinating because that is exactly what is lacking in analyzing Taoism. Because everybody, even in Germany, when I see everybody talks about authenticity from Nietzschean, Heideggerian perspective when they talk about Eastern philosophers. What I found very interesting, again, is that your book is not reducing everything to language. You know, the Genuine Pretender figure is not a person that is only witty. And humor in that regard, I strongly believe that humor in those traditions is an attitude, or even more than an attitude, it's a way of life. You know, it's not only that I am under stress, I make a joke, and for 10 minutes I am like doping, you know, for 10 seconds I am released, and then again another stress. You know, it's the consumerist understanding of New Age Buddhism that is so. But what I see in those traditions, as you analyze in the book, or in the Sufism, like can function like this, or in Buddhism, or in Stoicism, is that no, it's a lifestyle. You know, like you see in Pierre Hadot, you know, the way he analyzes Stoicism. You know, it's a way of life, it's a lifestyle. You know, that to the so humor in relation to all you do in your life. Sorry, more than that, I don't have any any scholarship to offer. But that was fantastic. I have to thank you again very much for the generosity, for the book, for the time, and for the brilliant ideas. I learned a lot from the book and this discussion.
Well, thank you very much. Too kind.
Yeah.